She took the $500 in crisp bills, slipped it into her apron pocket, then looked the black man in seat 1A dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong here." That's how it began. With that sentence, sharp, intentional, cold. A white-gloved hand moved to the overhead compartment as if adjusting it for passenger safety. But really, it was just a stall. Just long enough for her colleague to prepare the forged seat reassignment form. Just long enough for them to get ready to humiliate the one man who, in just 10 minutes, would end their entire careers. They didn't know, not yet, that the passenger they were trying to eject from first class wasn't just any man in a tailored Navy suit. He was Marcus Grant, the CEO, the owner of the very airline they worked for, and the moment of reckoning was already rolling down the runway. Before we jump into this unbelievable story of power, injustice, and corporate karma 3,000 feet in the sky, take a moment. Hit that subscribe button. Tap like if you believe in standing up to bias, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you witnessed this on your flight? Now, let's board Apex Airlines Flight AX-101, Seattle to Johannesburg, where 10 minutes changed everything. The time was 10 a.m. Pacific, June 15th. The cabin was cool, scent of citrus and leather-wrapped luxury in the air, and Marcus Grant, 42, dignified, composed, dressed in a custom Navy Tom Ford suit, stepped into first class. He carried no entourage, no flash, just quiet confidence and a duffel bag with the Apex Airlines logo. His airline. His company. He was heading to Johannesburg for a charity mission, something he'd been planning for months. But before his seatbelt clicked, before the cabin door sealed, the spiral had already begun. Sarah Coleman, 38, blonde bob perfectly coiffed, gave him a once-over that wasn't just visual, it was judgmental. Then came the words, "Sir, you're going to need to move. This seat's been reassigned." Calmly, Marcus produced his boarding pass, seat 1A. She didn't even look at it. "You're not listed," she insisted. "There must be a mistake. You'll need to move to economy." And just like that, the slap came. Not physical, but institutional. The kind that leaves a man of Marcus's stature blinking. Stunned not because it's new, but because it's still happening. Flight attendant Ryan Holt, 34, sidled up beside her. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his smile tight, eyes flaring just a little when he looked at Marcus. "Sir, this is first class. You're out of place here." His voice carried just enough sugar to pass, but the poison was unmistakable. Meanwhile, a passenger across the aisle, Edward Vaughn, 50, white, balding, with the kind of entitlement that dripped off his pressed khakis, leaned over and said with a smirk, "You heard them. Move along. You're holding things up." Marcus turned to him, calm still intact. "Excuse me?" Edward raised his eyebrows. "I gave her $500 to get this seat. She said it was mine. Don't make a scene. All right?" Ryan didn't flinch. Sarah didn't deny it. Instead, she glanced at the cabin curtain as if waiting for it to close, as if the galley could swallow this whole moment in quiet. Just 2 rows behind, Claire Evans, 40, white, dressed smartly in travel wear, tapped the record button on her phone. "I'm filming this," she announced, voice shaking. "This is messed up." Her husband, David Patel, 45, leaned forward, voice louder. "We saw him board like everyone else. Why are you treating him differently?" The tension was live now. The air, electric. Sarah whispered something to Ryan, who disappeared into the galley. From the corner, a younger flight attendant, a trainee, stood frozen. Mia Lin, 25, Chinese-American, eyes wide, then, quietly, to Sarah. "He's showing a valid ticket. I don't think we should—" Sarah cut her off. "Stay in your lane. Mia." Marcus sat, quietly. In 1A, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't call for a manager. He simply dialed his assistant. Lena Brooks. "Activate the internal system," he said softly. On the other end, Lena replied, "Already live. I've got the log feed." Meanwhile, Sarah turned back to him, now visibly irritated by the stares from the rest of the cabin. "Last warning, sir. Move to economy now, or we will be forced to call security before takeoff." And then, Edward added, loud enough for the cabin to hear, "Face it, economy's your place." Claire gasped. Did he just say that? David was already standing, arm raised as if ready to intervene. Mia looked like she was about to cry, and in that moment, something shifted. Marcus didn't move. He stared at Sarah, then at Ryan, who had returned now with a folded printout. Ryan waved it in the air. "We've got a reassignment here. Seat 1A was switched to Mr. Vaughn." He smirked, but his fingers trembled. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Let me see that." Ryan stepped back. "Internal policy. You'll see the captain shortly." What Ryan didn't realize, what Sarah was about to learn, was that the forgery wouldn't just fail, it would be the smoking gun. Claire stood. "I'm sorry, but this is not okay. I've seen enough discrimination to recognize it when it's happening." David followed. "This is a violation of rights. You're attacking him for being a black man in a suit. It's obvious." Murmurs ran through the cabin. Some heads ducked. Others looked toward the curtain, afraid, unsure, and yet, a few began to nod. One elderly woman muttered, "This again?" Another man stood quietly, arms crossed, in support. Back in the galley, David had caught just enough to hear Ryan whisper to Sarah, "We'll say he was aggressive. It's our word against his. Who are they gonna believe?" David returned to his seat, face pale, fists clenched. He mouthed to Claire, "I heard them. They're lying." And Mia? She clicked the record button on her phone's voice memo app, slipped it into her pocket, and stepped forward. "Marcus," she said, softly, "I believe you, and I have proof." He gave her a nod of quiet thanks. No ego, no grandstanding, just steady breath. Inside Marcus's mind, though, the scene had already happened once before. He was 23 again, checking into a luxury hotel in New York. The front desk clerk had glanced at his ID and said, "We don't have anything for you." "Sir, are you sure you're in the right place?" Same tone, same judgment. That moment had driven him through business school, through deals, through the founding of Apex. He hadn't forgotten it. And now, history tried to repeat itself. But this time, he owned the building. This time, he controlled the altitude. The cabin crew didn't know. The passengers didn't know. But in the next 10 minutes, Marcus Grant would change their lives. Not with threats, not with shouting, but with a quiet fury that, once unleashed, would ripple across corporate aviation like a storm front. All because someone looked at him and said, "You don't belong here. Either leave seat 1A now." Sarah hissed through clenched teeth, her voice sharp enough to cut through the rising buzz of first class. "Or face the consequences." The cabin lights glinted off her name tag, and behind her, Ryan folded his arms, grinning with the smug anticipation of a man convinced he'd already won. The passengers sat tense. Claire kept filming. David leaned forward, alert. Mia lingered by the service station, her eyes flicking between Sarah's flushed face and Marcus's unreadable calm. Marcus stayed in his seat. His legs were crossed, hands steepled in his lap, voice level. "You're escalating a situation you created. Sarah!" Her nostrils flared. "You're refusing to comply with a directive. You're making this difficult." Ryan, voice oily with fake concern, added, You're disrupting our takeoff. First class must remain a peaceful environment for paying customers. Edward Vaughn, barely hiding his glee, piped up again from beside them. And I paid in cash. You're embarrassing yourself. Man, this seat's mine now. His voice dripped with that particular brand of condescension, the kind that doesn't care who hears. Marcus glanced at Edward, then back to Sarah. This seat, he said coolly, was assigned to me. I'm not moving. And if you continue to harass me, I will hold this airline, and every crew member involved, accountable. A few gasps murmured through the cabin. Ryan leaned closer, lowering his voice. You don't belong here, and you know it. Claire shot to her feet. Excuse me? She shouted. Did you just say that? Sarah turned toward her. Ma'am, please sit down and stop interfering. But David stood too. He belongs here more than you do. You're both on a power trip, and we all see it. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He didn't need to. The bias was already bleeding into every action, every sideways glance, every misstep. Mia, voice shaking but firm, said, His ticket's valid. I checked it myself before boarding. Sarah spun on her. This doesn't concern you. Mia stepped back, ashamed, but she didn't sit down. Then came the first flicker of fire from Marcus. He picked up his phone, calm as ever, and called Lena again. Escalate the internal log, he said. Tag cabin behavior, flight AX-101, full report. Lena, somewhere in the Seattle office tower with Apex Airlines crest on the door, replied. Already compiling, the system is capturing audio. Sarah turned ghostly pale. She didn't understand what system he was talking about, but she would. Oh, she would. Ryan disappeared into the galley again. And this time, David followed discreetly, stopping just near the curtain, pretending to stretch. What he heard made his hands shake. Ryan, laughing under his breath, said to Sarah, Let's just say he was being aggressive. No cameras saw everything. We'll say he caused a disturbance. Tried to intimidate us. Sarah muttered back. He's not like our usual first-class crowd. Just call it in and have him moved. David froze, then slipped back to his seat, whispering to Claire. They're lying. They're planning to frame him. Marcus sat still, steel in his jaw now. The same man who, at 19, had walked into a jewelry store looking to buy his mother a birthday necklace and been told by the sales clerk, We don't sell imitation chains here. Because of the hoodie he wore. That humiliation had turned to hunger. That hunger had turned to ambition. And that ambition? It had built a global aviation brand, one that now spanned 4 continents, one that paid Sarah's salary. Ryan returned holding a clipboard. Captain says you'll be escorted off if you continue to be non-compliant. But the captain hadn't said that. Not yet. Ryan was bluffing. He pointed to the updated forged reassignment log. You're not on this manifest. Passenger Vaughn is... He placed the log on the tray table. Claire filmed it. Is that a real log? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Because I know forgery when I see it, David added. You really want to explain this to the FAA later? Sarah ignored them both. Sir, she snapped at Marcus. Last warning. Marcus smiled faintly, a blade wrapped in silk. You've already made your mistake. Sarah, every moment from here is just evidence. Mia stepped forward again, this time bolder. This isn't right, she said, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. There were prior complaints about Sarah's conduct. I know because I reviewed them during training. Management never followed up. Sarah's face flushed. That's slander. Mia didn't flinch. It's documented, and I'm recording now. She tapped her blazer pocket. The whispers around them grew. Someone in row 2 whispered. Did you hear that? "They've been reported before?" a woman in row 3 muttered. "It's always the same pattern." Marcus looked to Mia. "Thank you," he said, and that moment, just 3 words, gave Mia the courage she needed. Edward, meanwhile, leaned back in his seat, arms folded behind his head like he owned the aircraft. "This is a circus. You people make everything about race." The cabin went dead silent. Claire turned the camera straight on him. "Did you just say that?" she said. "You bribed a flight attendant and now you're calling us the problem?" Edward shrugged. "I paid. He's in my seat. What more do you want?" David raised his voice. "Justice." That single word landed like a spark in dry brush. Passengers began murmuring louder. A man in the back shouted, "Let him stay!" Someone else clapped. The cabin wasn't just watching now, they were choosing sides. Sarah turned back to Marcus, face tight. "You're making a scene," she snapped. Marcus shook his head. "No, Sarah, you made the scene. I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for." His voice was low, but every word carried. "And let me be clear, if you put your hands on me, or call security, or falsify one more document, I will shut this entire operation down from my phone before we reach 1,000 feet. Ryan laughed nervously. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus leaned forward. "You'll find out soon." And at that moment, you could feel it. The cabin turning, not just the passengers, but the atmosphere itself. People shifting, eyes narrowing, truths sinking in. Sarah suddenly seemed smaller, Ryan less confident, and Mia, standing there, young, unranked, but brave, was becoming something greater. What would you say to Sarah's bias right now? Imagine watching this unfold beside you. Would you speak up? Would you stand, like David, film, like Claire, or record, like Mia? Drop your answers below. Let your voice be part of this moment, because silence is no longer an option. The intercom cracked to life with an icy chime, and Sarah's voice rang across the cabin like a courtroom gavel. "Attention passengers, we are experiencing a delay due to a non-compliant guest in seat 1A who is refusing to move to their reassigned seat in economy." Gasps scattered across the plush first-class cabin like dropped glass. Marcus looked up, jaw tight, not from surprise, but from the quiet, boiling restraint of a man who'd been insulted so many times in his life that he'd mastered the art of freezing his fury behind his eyes. "This is outrageous," Claire Evans shouted, standing up, her phone still recording. "He didn't refuse anything. You're lying." Sarah ignored her, adjusting her scarf as if this were just another routine flight and not the unraveling of her career. Ryan stepped forward from the galley again, this time not smiling. "Security will meet us at the gate if he doesn't comply. Last chance. Mr. He paused. He didn't even know Marcus's last name. "Grant," Marcus said coldly, finishing it for him. "My name is Marcus Grant." Ryan smirked. "Well, Mr. Grant, let's not make this difficult." Edward Vaughn, oozing with confidence from 1B, chuckled and muttered, "He's not first-class material, and you all know it." And just like that, the simmer exploded. "He belongs here more than you ever will," David Patel snapped, standing up, voice reverberating through the cabin. "You bought a seat with a bribe. That doesn't make you better. It makes you part of the problem." Edward shrugged. "What problem? I paid. They accepted. That's called business." A murmur of disgust moved through the rows like a wave. Another passenger stood up. Then another. A middle-aged woman with silver hair near the front said, "I've flown this route for 10 years. I've never seen a passenger treated this way." Sarah turned, flustered. "Please return to your seats. You're all interfering with flight operations." But they didn't sit. In fact, they stepped into the aisle, subtly creating a wall between Marcus and the crew. Mia stepped forward again, her voice clearer now, her fear overridden by righteous adrenaline. "I have a recording," she said, her hand resting over her phone in her pocket, "of Ryan mocking Mr. Grant and of Sarah saying she was going to teach him a lesson." A few passengers gasped. Claire stopped filming and just stared at Mia, stunned. "You what?" "I recorded it," Mia repeated. "In the galley, when they thought no one was listening." Ryan turned pale. "You can't record crew. That's against protocol. Discrimination is against federal law," Mia shot back. "Which one do you want to argue in court?" Sarah reached out as if to grab her, but Marcus stood suddenly, calm but commanding, his presence snapping into sharp relief. "Touch her," he said, voice velvet but lethal. "And you'll leave this aircraft in handcuffs." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ryan snapped. "You're threatening a flight attendant now? That's a federal offense." Marcus didn't blink. "What you've done," he said, "is a federal offense. Falsifying a seat log, accepting bribes, targeting a passenger based on race, and slandering me publicly over the intercom." He paused. "It's all recorded. It's all logged. And when we land, none of you will be employed." Ryan looked toward the front, but the cockpit door remained closed. Sarah whispered, "We'll say you were aggressive. They'll believe us." Claire raised her phone. "Not this time. Not with all of us watching. Recording. Speaking up." David's voice cut in again. "I overheard them in the galley. They were planning this." Murmurs swelled louder. One man in row 3 began chanting, "Let him stay!" Another woman shouted, "Stop the discrimination!" Ryan's eyes darted across the cabin. He was losing control. Sarah looked stricken. Edward had gone silent. The dynamic had flipped, without a punch, without a scream, just the undeniable gravity of truth, and a cabin full of witnesses who weren't afraid to call it out. Sarah moved to grab the intercom again, but Marcus spoke first. "This seat," he said, loud enough for all of first class to hear, "was paid for, assigned, and logged in my name. And your actions today have put this airline at risk. Not because I'm unruly, but because you couldn't accept that a black man might belong in 1A. Mia looked at him like he was a lighthouse in the storm. Claire lowered her phone, visibly shaken. "You're absolutely right," she said softly. "And you're not alone. In the galley." Sarah and Ryan whispered furiously, trying to decide whether to press the fake narrative of a disruptive passenger. But the tide had turned. Passengers had formed a barrier. The aisle was clogged with defiance. The flight crew, once fully in control, were now isolated by truth. Marcus sat back down, not in surrender, but in power, calm, precise. He opened his phone, typed something quickly, and said, "Lena, tag final escalation, trigger legal review." "On the other end," Lena Brooks responded. "Already underway. Karen's on standby." Ryan looked like he'd been slapped. "Who's Karen?" he asked, trying to sound unbothered. "You'll find out," Marcus said flatly, inside his mind. He returned to the memory of a flight he took with his father when he was 27, first class, upgraded last minute. They'd been pulled aside before boarding, questioned like thieves in front of other passengers, told, "We just want to make sure you're in the right place." His father had smiled politely. Marcus had clenched his fists. He promised himself that day that he'd build a world where men like him wouldn't be asked if they belonged. And here he was, back on a plane, back in the fire. But this time with every tool he needed to reshape the system that failed them. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah snapped suddenly, tears rising in her throat. "You could have just moved." Marcus stared at her. "And taught you that bribery and bias work? No. You need to be held accountable. For everyone who's been silenced, for every tired mother pulled from a priority seat, for every teenager humiliated over a dress code, for every black, brown, or different-looking traveler who was told they were in the wrong place. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of realization, full of reckoning. Claire raised her voice. "I think you owe him an apology," David added. "Start with that, then resign." The wall of passengers didn't budge. First class had turned into a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. Mia pulled her phone fully out now, screen lit, recording clearly. "I'll submit this to corporate," she said. "They need to see what happened here." Marcus glanced at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you." "Mia?" She nodded. "We've had enough of this." How would you react right now? If you were on this plane, witnessing a man stand his ground not with rage, but with facts, witnesses, and grace? Would you raise your voice? Would you block the aisle with your body to defend justice? Would you film, speak up, document the truth? Drop your answer below, and never underestimate the power of standing beside someone in the right seat. It happened fast. Too fast for Sarah to control. 1 second. She was reaching out to grab Marcus by the arm. And the next. David Patel stepped into the aisle, hand raised, blocking her with a voice that thundered louder than the engines. "Don't you touch him!" She froze, startled by the force in his words. The rest of the cabin shifted like a wave. Claire moved closer. Mia stood between Marcus and Ryan, and a man from row 3 physically stepped into the narrow corridor, saying, "No one lays a hand on that man." Ryan's voice cracked with desperation as he lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the wrist. "You're coming with me to economy." But Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply turned and said, "Let go." And that's when the cabin erupted. A woman near the back screamed, "Stop him!" And a chorus of voices rose at once, overlapping, undeniable. "That's assault! Call the captain! We're not letting this happen!" And just like that, the human barrier solidified, passengers stepping forward, arms out, backs straight, bodies forming a protective ring around Marcus like a living shield. Ryan staggered back, his grip broken not by force, but by the sheer presence of dozens of witnesses who refused to let racism wear a uniform unchecked. Sarah looked to the intercom again, but a passenger near the front reached up and yanked the handset cord free. "You've said enough," he growled, in the center of it all. Marcus stood like a mountain, calm, composed, but no longer silent. His voice rang out, commanding yet restrained. "You violated every principle of aviation ethics. You accepted a bribe. You falsified documentation. You tried to physically remove a valid, ticketed passenger based on race. And worst of all, you did it in front of witnesses." Sarah's lips trembled. "You're blowing this out of proportion." But Mia spoke next, lifting her phone. "No, Sarah. This is exactly the proportion it deserves. I have your voice. I have your bias. And now, the world will hear it." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. Behind her, David shouted, "You lied, you schemed, and now you're caught." In the galley, another flight attendant peeked out, one who had stayed silent until now. A young man, maybe mid-20s, clearly shaken. "I didn't know," he stammered. "I just saw Sarah switch the clipboard. I thought it was a mistake." "It wasn't," Marcus said. "It was a setup." And with that, he raised his phone again and pressed redial. Lena answered instantly. "Lena," Marcus said calmly, "prepare the internal system for termination protocol. Put Karen on standby. We're initiating a level 4 escalation." There was a pause. Then Lena replied, "Understood. Karen's on the line." A new voice entered the call. Sharp, composed, female. "This is Karen Walsh, board executive. Proceed. Marcus." Every passenger nearby stiffened. Sarah blinked. "Karen who?" Marcus turned to her. "The person who will be approving your termination within the next 10 minutes. Sarah stumbled backward as if slapped. Ryan looked stunned. What? Termination? Yes, Marcus said. For cause, for misconduct, for bias, for placing this airline at risk of legal exposure and reputational collapse, Claire gasped, realizing the full weight of what was unfolding. Wait, are you saying you— I own Apex Airlines, Marcus said, voice steady, measured. Every plane, every seat, every decision, including who remains employed. A hush fell. Even Edward looked stunned, shrinking in his seat like a man who'd just realized the casino chips he used to bribe the dealer were counterfeit. Sarah tried to stammer something. Anything. You can't just— I can, Marcus interrupted. And I will. He turned to Mia. You stood up. You spoke out. You did what your seniors wouldn't. Effective immediately. I'm authorizing your promotion. Lena will process the transfer paperwork before we land. Mia's eyes welled with tears. Thank you, sir. David laughed, not mockingly, but in sheer disbelief. This is the greatest plot twist I've ever seen on a plane. Claire, still filming, whispered. And the most satisfying. Sarah looked broken now. Her shoulders curled inward. Ryan had backed up near the curtain, looking like he wanted to disappear. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Another passenger. A woman from row 5 stepped forward, her voice trembling. I overheard Sarah last flight. She was mocking another black passenger in the galley. I didn't say anything then. I'm sorry. But now I have to. Marcus nodded. Thank you. That broke the final wall. A middle-aged man near the front pulled out his phone. I've been flying Apex for years. I always suspected something was wrong with how first class treated people of color. Today proved it. Mia stepped beside him. Help me send it all in, she said. Every audio clip, every image. We'll send it through the internal system. Marcus raised his phone again. Lena, are you logging everything? Yes, Marcus, Lena said. Karen has seen the transcript. The board is watching live. Full backing for your decisions. Sarah crumpled into a seat near the front, clutching the headrest like a lifeline. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. He wasn't supposed to be. What? Marcus asked, stepping closer. Rich? Powerful? Your boss? He paused, letting that sink in. You would have done this to anyone who looked like me, who didn't look the part. That's what makes it worse, Ryan blurted out. We didn't know who you were. And if I wasn't the CEO, Marcus snapped, you would have succeeded. That's the point. David stepped beside Marcus, offering a firm hand on his shoulder. We've got your back, not because you're the CEO, but because you're right. Claire nodded, adding, we need to speak out more. For every Marcus who doesn't own the plane. The passengers murmured in agreement. It wasn't just about this flight anymore. It was about every slight, every indignity, every time someone had been made to feel smaller in a space they had every right to be in. The human barrier stood strong. The crew's authority had crumbled. And the man they tried to eject sat calmly in the seat he had rightfully claimed, with dignity, with fire, and with backup. Mia turned to Marcus once more. What happens now? She asked. Now? Marcus said, taking a breath, eyes scanning the cabin that had turned courtroom, battleground, and sanctuary all in one. Now we bring consequences, and after that, we build something better. Marcus stood still for a moment, surrounded by silence, an almost holy stillness in the cabin, thick with breath held, eyes wide, disbelief rising like pressure in the fuselage. And then, with the quiet authority of a man who had waited his whole life for a moment like this, he turned to the passengers and crew and said, My name is Marcus Grant. I am the founder, CEO, and sole owner of Apex Airlines. The gasp that followed wasn't theatrical. It was visceral, real, pulled from the chest of nearly every person within earshot. Sarah went pale, lips parting but no sound coming out. Ryan blinked rapidly, looking at Marcus like he'd seen a ghost. Edward Vaughn actually recoiled in his seat, whispering, "No," under his breath as if he'd just realized he'd slapped the king in his own palace. Claire lowered her phone slowly. David's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You own this airline?" he finally managed. Marcus nodded, gaze steady. "Every seat, every aircraft, every policy, including the authority to terminate any employee who violates the core values we built this company on: equality, dignity, and respect." Then, without theatrics or flourish, Marcus raised his phone again. "Lena, are you recording?" "Yes, Marcus," came her voice, crisp, audible to nearby passengers. "Karen is on the line. You're clear to proceed." "Good," he said, locking eyes with Sarah. "This is formal notice, effective immediately. Flight attendants Sarah Coleman and Ryan Holt are terminated from Apex Airlines for gross misconduct, discrimination, accepting bribery, and falsifying official records. Furthermore, any crew member who enabled or concealed this behavior will be placed under immediate review." Karen Walsh's voice entered the cabin speaker next, piped through Marcus's phone. "The board unanimously supports this decision. Public acknowledgement and reform policy will follow within the hour." That was the hammer, the confirmation, the moment where outrage became consequence. Claire gasped. David let out a soft, "Damn." Mia blinked, stunned. He wasn't bluffing. She whispered to no one. Sarah staggered back, slumping into the nearest jump seat like her legs had given out. "You can't just... This is my career." Marcus tilted his head. "You traded your career for $500 and a lie." Her lips trembled, but she had no defense. Not one. Ryan shook his head violently. "We didn't know who you were. We just thought..." "What?" Marcus said sharply. "That I was out of place? That I was unworthy of seat 1A? He stepped closer, his voice still low but now hard as steel. "You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected every black man, every immigrant, every young traveler who ever sat in your section and wondered if they'd be treated like everyone else." The cabin remained breathless. Even the hum of the aircraft seemed to dim. "You violated every value this airline was founded on," Marcus continued. "And had I not been who I am, you would have gotten away with it. That's the part that keeps me up at night." Sarah finally looked up, cheeks wet. "We made a mistake. You made a choice," Marcus snapped. "And now you face the consequence." Then, something even more unexpected happened. Ryan stepped forward, shaking, palms open, voice hollow. "It wasn't just us," he said. It's the culture. We've been coached, quietly, on who gets priority treatment, who's fit for first class. There are codes, looks, warnings we give each other. We call it passenger profiling." Claire's mouth dropped. "You're saying it's systemic?" Ryan nodded, defeated. "Regional managers know. They reward upgrades when we adjust seat assignments discreetly. We're told to do it verbally, never in writing. But Sarah and I, we kept a list, a hidden log. Names we bumped. Most of them." He stopped. "Were black, or brown, or just didn't look the part." It landed like a thunderclap. Claire's hands trembled. David sat down, stunned. Mia whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus nodded slowly, breathing deep, steady. "Thank you," he said, not as praise, but as acknowledgement of the weight of truth finally exposed. That log, that confession, it's enough to trigger a full audit across Apex. He turned toward his phone. Lena, already syncing with legal, she said. Internal audit team notified. Karen is authorizing emergency compliance reform. Karen's voice came back through the phone. This seals it. Marcus, implement the terminations. Initiate public apology. You have the board's full support. And Mia? She blinked, startled. Yes? You'll be our liaison for the internal reform rollout. If you accept... Mia's voice caught in her throat. I do... Marcus nodded once, then turned to face the entire cabin. To every passenger who witnessed this, thank you for speaking up, for forming that human wall, for refusing to look away. You reminded me why this airline exists, not just to move people, but to uplift them. Claire put a hand to her chest. David wiped his eyes discreetly. The woman in row 5 whispered, It's like watching the world tilt back into place. Edward, still slouched in disbelief, muttered, This is insane. Marcus turned to him. You're banned from future Apex flights. Your money bought you a seat, but your actions bought you a lifetime exile. Edward tried to protest, but his voice cracked, and no one listened. For the first time since takeoff preparations, he looked very small, very unimportant. Sarah finally spoke, her voice hoarse. I wasn't always like this. I just wanted to belong. Too. Marcus looked at her, not unkindly, but with no room left for leniency. You had a choice, he repeated, and so did I. I choose to fix what you tried to break. With that, he sat back down in 1A, looked out the window into the bright blue sky, and exhaled. 10 minutes had passed. Just 10 minutes since he'd stepped onto that plane. But in that time, lives had been changed, truths revealed, and an empire's values tested and upheld. The cabin had quieted to a surreal stillness, not from fear, but from reverence. As if everyone on board understood they were witnessing not just an uncomfortable confrontation, but a reckoning. Marcus stood once more, motioning Mia to stand beside him. This aircraft, he began, will not take off until we close this chapter the right way. He turned toward the cockpit, his voice clear. Captain Foster, please join us in first class. Moments later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Alan Foster, 55, tall and composed, stepped out in full uniform. His expression was tight, unreadable, until his eyes met Marcus's. Recognition flashed, respect followed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said without needing a microphone, it is my honor to formally acknowledge that Mr. Marcus Grant, seated in 1A, is not only a passenger on this flight, but the owner and CEO of Apex Airlines. A ripple moved through the cabin again. Marcus nodded, then stepped forward and addressed the crew directly. Sarah Coleman, Ryan Holt, and Ethan Price. He motioned toward the young crew member who had remained silently complicit. This is your final call. You are officially terminated from Apex Airlines for misconduct, bias, and failure to uphold passenger safety and equality. Your access to all internal systems is revoked as of this moment. Your names will be listed on a do not rehire register. Sarah winced as if the words were a slap. Ryan said nothing, just stared at the floor. Ethan looked shocked. But I didn't do anything. Exactly, Marcus replied. You watched and said nothing. He turned toward Mia. You, on the other hand, spoke. You stood up. You documented injustice when it wasn't safe to do so. Effective immediately. You are promoted to Associate Supervisor of In-Flight Operations. You will report directly to Karen Walsh as part of our internal reform initiative. Passengers clapped. Real applause, not the polite, forced kind, but sincere, raw. Mia's hands went to her face. Thank you, she whispered, eyes shining. Captain Foster nodded solemnly. "We're honored to have you aboard, Ms. Lynn." Marcus turned again, this time addressing everyone. An official public apology from Apex Airlines is being transmitted to national outlets now. It reads, "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight AX-101 involving Mr. Marcus Grant. This event exposed failures in our internal culture and individual conduct. We extend our apology to all passengers affected, and especially to Mr. Grant, whose treatment did not reflect the values of our airline. Immediate actions are being taken to ensure accountability, retraining, and reform." Lena's voice echoed from Marcus's phone. "Apology has been sent. Major outlets are amplifying it. Feedback is already pouring in." Karen Walsh's voice followed. "And Marcus, the board is greenlighting a new bias reporting portal, launching within 48 hours. Mia will be featured as a founding voice." A woman in row 2 clapped again, rising to her feet. "About time someone in power did something real." Marcus inclined his head slightly. "We're not perfect, but we will be better." Then the silence broke. Again. But this time not from applause, or intercoms, or accusations. From Sarah, slouched in the jump seat, voice barely a whisper. "We covered it up," she said. The room fell silent again. "There were others," she continued. "Past flights. We forged logs. We adjusted seating assignments based on appearances. We even swapped boarding times to avoid paperwork. The system allowed it. No one stopped us. We were never caught. Until now." Ryan covered his face with both hands. Ethan looked away. Claire, filming again, just whispered, "Jesus." Marcus didn't flinch. "Why?" he asked. Not accusatory, but like a surgeon probing for the last shard. "Because we were told to keep first class looking a certain way," Sarah said. "We were told, make the cabin look premium." That was code for what we did, and we got away with it. Until you. She looked up at him then, eyes red, face hollow. "You weren't supposed to be the owner." Marcus took a breath, deep and controlled. "And if I hadn't been, you'd be in economy, maybe off the flight," she said. "No one would have believed you." The cabin murmured. One man whispered. "She admitted it," another woman said. "That could have been me. Or my son." Marcus turned to Karen's voice on the line. "You heard that?" "We all did," Karen replied. "The reform plan just doubled in scope. Consider this your turning point." Mia stepped forward now, stronger than before. "Let's stop hiding the problem behind policy," she said. "Let's admit what this really was. Bias, quiet, polite, uniformed, but still bias." Marcus nodded. "Well said." Then, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, he declared, "This is no longer just a firing. This is the start of a systemic cleanse, and it begins right now." The cabin had transformed. Once a stage for humiliation, it now sat cloaked in quiet reflection, like the moments after a powerful storm. Air still charged, but clear. Sarah, Ryan, and Ethan had been escorted off the aircraft by ground staff after it taxied back to the gate. No applause, no anger, just silence, the kind that follows accountability. Marcus remained seated in 1A, no longer needing to assert his place. It was understood. Across from him, Mia Lynn scribbled notes into a provided Apex incident logbook. Now promoted and acting with the weight of responsibility that most wouldn't envy, but she carried like armor. Claire, David, and the other passengers returned to their seats. But they weren't the same people who boarded that morning. They had seen truth up close, ugly, institutional, and exposed, and they had chosen to speak against it. As the flight resumed boarding with a replacement crew, Captain Foster returned to the intercom and read a message approved by Marcus and Karen Walsh. We thank you for your patience during a necessary delay. Today, Apex Airlines reaffirms our commitment to equity, transparency, and safety, not just in the sky, but in every part of our journey. And with that, the plane rolled down the runway and lifted into the sky, not just toward Johannesburg, but toward something more just. News of the incident had already gone viral, not because passengers posted to social media, but because someone in corporate, likely someone close to Lena or Karen, leaked the internal apology. And when news outlets discovered that the man thrown out of his seat was the CEO of the airline he built from the ground up, the story caught fire. Headlines read, "CEO kicked out of first class on his own airline, fires entire crew mid-flight." But behind the clickbait was something deeper. A mirror held up to an industry long overdue for change. Apex Airlines initiated an internal audit, uncovering dozens of ignored complaints, some dating back 5 years. Marcus's reform swept swiftly, training restructured, crew evaluation tools rewritten, anonymous reporting made accessible in multiple languages, and a new division of passenger advocacy launched with Mia as its youngest ever director. That wasn't a PR move. It was a promise, and for many, it was personal. 3 months later, Marcus sat in the same seat, 1A, on a different flight. A young black boy, maybe 10, peeked around the curtain on his way to use the restroom. "Are you the guy from the video?" he asked shyly. Marcus smiled. "I am." The boy's father appeared, nervous. "I'm so sorry. He's just curious." "It's okay," Marcus interrupted, kneeling to eye level. "Curiosity built this airline." He reached into his briefcase and handed the boy a custom pin, Apex's new logo, now redesigned with a multicolored wingtip symbolizing unity. "You can sit here one day too." The boy beamed. As they walked back to their seats, the father turned and whispered, "Thank you for making it safer for us." Back in his seat, Marcus opened a letter that had been mailed to Apex headquarters 2 weeks earlier, addressed only to the man in seat 1A. It was written in pen on lined notebook paper. It read, "Dear Mr. Grant, I was on flight X-101. I didn't speak up, but I watched everything. I froze. I've been frozen in moments like that before, but watching you stay calm, seeing people rise, hearing Mia speak, something in me thawed. Since that day, I reported a manager who discriminated against my coworker. I got her the raise she deserved, and I told my daughter that standing by quietly isn't strength. Speaking up is. Thank you for teaching me that." Marcus held the letter in his hand long after he finished reading it. It felt heavier than it should, as if truth weighed more when written by a trembling pen. And then came the final twist. During a routine compliance audit, a former regional manager came forward, anonymously at first, then publicly. He admitted that Sarah and Ryan's behavior had been protected by middle management. "We were told to let it slide," he said in a signed affidavit. "We were complicit. There were quarterly memos, coded language, unwritten policies. First class had a look, and anyone outside that was called a disruption risk. It wasn't written down, but we all knew." That admission rocked the industry. Airlines across the country began issuing their own reforms, and Apex Airlines was invited to brief the Senate Transportation Committee on bias in commercial aviation. As the months passed, Marcus didn't chase headlines. He funded programs to recruit underrepresented cabin crew, established a scholarship in Mia Lin's name, and implemented a zero-tolerance policy against discrimination backed by federal review. Ryan, in a private apology months later, sent a handwritten note. "I was wrong. I saw the world through fear, not truth. I'm sorry. I'm working to become someone better." It wasn't publicized. Marcus never mentioned it, but he kept the letter, folded, tucked in the same drawer as the one from the anonymous passenger. Proof that people can change. Not always. But sometimes, and sometimes, is enough.